Good afternoon, everyone. Did the world end? Fortunately not. Crisis averted for now. Article 4 and 5 avoided, hopefully. Keep your fingers crossed, calmer heads prevail, because we got really close going from having a meeting about a meeting to meet later with NATO to launch everything at Russia. Our tension's on the rise, definitely, but that's par for the course. Also, thank you for taking the time to email me, Jason, with information as things developed. Welcome to The Real Report, Part 2 of rockets landing in Poland, the video from yesterday. And speaking of escalating, the UK is not helping, published just this morning. We're going to take a look at this article from the Irish Sun real quick, and then we'll get into Poland in a second and cover who and what is responsible for the rocket that landed inside the NATO country. And this is all tied together with Russia-Ukraine, so I'll have a lot of good info. Stick around. Now, blood on his hands. Mad Vladimir Putin must be blamed for stray air defense missile that killed 2 on NATO soil, says Rishi Sunak. Again, regardless of who fired it, and that's some pretty dangerous rhetoric, especially the day after it's been debunked that it was actually Ukraine. And of course, yesterday Fox News jumped on the war bandwagon as well. Russian missile land in Poland, killing 2. I wish people would, take a step back, think about things, wait for the evidence to come out before we, escalate into launching the great sun at our fellow countrymen. Poland missile strike may come from Ukraine's self-defense. U.S. officials, again, this is from this morning at about 5 a.m. Eastern. Missile that struck Poland may have been fired by Ukrainian Air Force forces at an incoming Russian missile. From the AP report, the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian one. Biden's comments that it was unlikely the missile was fired from Russia contradicts information from Tuesday from a senior U.S. intelligence official who told the AP that Russian missiles crossed into Poland. Of course, I'm sure a lot of people were hoping to just hit the button and launch NATO into the fray. Fortunately, that hasn't happened. Brief NATO G7 members on its talks with Poland from Biden, and Russia continues to escalate its attacks in Ukraine. Apologies if you can hear these sirens in the background. Ambulance and a fire truck just went by. And of course, Poland NATO agreed deadly Polish border Russian attack was errant Ukrainian missile. Article 5, the NATO Collective Defense Treaty, everyone was worried would be first invoked act leading to World War III. Zelensky demanded action from the West over the supposed brazen aggression against a NATO member, hitting NATO territory with missiles. This is Russian missile attack on collective security, I tell you. Of course, a really significant escalation. Action is needed, Zelensky said, when it was, in fact, Ukraine's, we believe, an S-300 that attempted to shoot down a Russian missile, of course missed, and then went into Poland. Ukraine Minister of Ukraine who attempted to preempt what he slammed as a developing Russia-promoted conspiracy theory. Again, foreign minister of Ukraine. Warsaw then stopped just short of any talk of Article 5. Of course, we're talking about Poland now. But then floated Article 4 as the basis of an emergency NATO security meeting for Wednesday, which calls for consultations in the event a NATO country is under threat. Again, so that happened this morning. No indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO. And what about the next time a similar border tragedy or incident on NATO land plays out? Will the same Russia is attacking NATO narrative prevail before anyone is allowed to ask simple questions? That is something worth thinking about. So definitely stick around. We're going to be covering some more info on Russia, Ukraine. Leave a like, comment down below, subscribe with the notification bell. Of course, to stay up to date, share with family, friends, your dog, your local news station, all that good stuff. Now, U.S. sanctions production transfer of Iranian drones to Russia, and then there's a really interesting article next after this because, of course, Iran's supplying Russia with drones. Well, as it turns out, we're now supplying Ukraine with suicide drones as well. Really interesting stuff going on. And, of course, we're going to cover the $37 billion request from Biden to Congress to send more stimulus and aid to Ukraine. Now, the U.S. Treasury Department said it imposed sanctions on the Shahed Aviation Industries Research Center. Of course, that's the one supplying Iranian drones that have been used by Russia in attacks on infrastructure in Ukraine. And the U.S., here from CNN actually, U.S. studying how to modify powerful armed drone as Ukrainian demand grows. As Russian forces have retreated in Ukraine's south, of course we're talking about Kherson, the Biden administration has announced a new slew of military packages for Ukraine, including a piece of weaponry. The Ukraine's military has long sought the multi-use Gray Eagle drone armed with Hellfire missiles. According to the two officials, the U.S. has been looking into modifications that can be made to the deadly drone, changes that would make a potential of losing any with their sensitive onboard technology less of a danger and possibly increase the likelihood of Ukraine receiving them. There are specific and very technical tweaks and neutering that can be done to these that may make it possible in the near term. Those are made by General Atomics and referred to in the Army as the MQ-1C for anyone familiar. The Gray Eagle, which can carry 4 Hellfire missiles and fly at 25,000 feet for almost 30 hours. Pretty impressive stuff. And the Gray Eagle is the most sensitive, but they wouldn't be considered escalatory since similar capabilities are already being provided. I don't know about that one. We are really drawing a fine line. And of course, another article after the aid package, we are sending Avenger air defense. So at what point are we crossing Putin's red line? Of course, a $400 million package for Ukraine announced earlier this month, here's the takeaway from the article, included another commitment of more than 1,000 unmanned Phoenix Ghost drones. Unlike the Gray Eagle, those are smaller, single-use suicide drones. So this is the first time that we've heard any info. We are sending them 1,000 Phoenix Ghost suicide drones for the Ukrainians to use against the Russians. And the U.S. is sending Avenger air defense systems to Ukraine to keep the skies free of Russian aircraft, again as part of the $400 million in armaments from thousands of artillery rounds and ammunition for the HIMARS and the brand new Avenger air defense system. A little bit of info on that. The Avenger uses the AN MPQ-64 Sentinel radar and Stinger missiles, both of which are already in use by the Ukrainians. The Stinger in its man-portable form. First introduced in 1988, the Avenger was traditionally attached to Army divisions, so I was not aware that those were deployed in 1988. And U.S. scrambles to reassure Ukraine after Milley comments on negotiations. The Biden administration is in damage control mode after a top U.S. general said a window for peace talks between Kiev and Moscow could open this winter. Of course, you guys saw that this week, just before the incident with Poland. Changed the subject, coincidentally. General Mills here, as I like to joke. You know, the bottom line, we're buying artillery shells, 155 millimeter from South Korea, the Department of Army, Navy, etc., Department of Defense, Pentagon, they've all said together that we don't have the defense production to keep up this proxy war, and stockpiles in most of the NATO countries are depleted to a dangerous level, and that we could not fight on two fronts simultaneously, example China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine. And I think it's interesting that they floated the idea that there might be a window for peace talks coming up, so keep an eye. Again, if you guys haven't already, hit the like button. It's really going to help me out. Ukraine, Zelensky snubs Russia as he addresses the G19 at G20. And if you guys are familiar with my channel, I talk about food, famine, nuclear stuff quite often, and it's interesting to note that was a main talking point at the G20. Zelensky pleaded for an extension of the Ukrainian grain export deal due to expire soon, and since the day that the deal began, 10 million tons of grain and other food have been exported, preventing a global food crisis. The right to food is a fundamental right of every person in the world, he said. Not true. The UN has said that millions of Africans are going to starve to death. Well, I should say, quote, verbatim, face severe food insecurity, end quote, is, I believe, what the United Nations actually said regarding Africa, aka you're going to starve and die. Russia said on Saturday that there had yet to be any agreement to extend the deal and allowing Ukraine to ship out food. It has insisted that Western sanctions be lifted so Russia can export its own food and fertilizer to world markets without hindrance. And of course, fertilizer being the big one there. Anybody who knows anybody who's a farmer in any capacity knows that fertilizer is a massive issue and is going to have extreme repercussions going into 2023 as people don't plant new crops or they've sold off their cattle herds because they can't get the hay, etc. And UK to build 5 new frigates to counter Russia threat. Britain will spend $4.2 billion, 4.9 US, on 5 new frigates from defense giant BAE Systems to bolster security in the face of increased Russian threats, from the Prime Minister. Biden unveils $37 billion more in emergency Ukraine aid on the heels of Polish border attack. So it'll be interesting to see what all's in there. 3/4 of the $40 billion approved by Congress earlier this year for Ukraine has already been dispersed or committed, and reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to NATO. So urging for more weapons, funding, missiles, artillery shells, and anti-air defense systems. And it'll be interesting to see what all gets sent. Here's what NATO Article 5 is and how it applies to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which again, fortunately, was avoided. Article 5 is the principle that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all members. It has been a cornerstone of the 30-member alliance since it was founded in 1949 as a counterweight to none other than the Soviet Union. Since the U.S. is the largest and most powerful NATO member, any state in the alliance is effectively under U.S. protection, and the parties agree again that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. But an interesting one, the bottom 20 countries in NATO, some of them, for example, where is it? Don't even have an army. I believe it was Iceland. Let's see here. Exercise the right of an individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with the other parties, such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. Again, a lot of these countries at the bottom of the 30 don't even have militaries. NATO's Article 5 principle stretches beyond attacks on the homeland, and the alliance has also taken collective defense measures on several occasions, including deploying Patriot missiles in 2012 on the Syrian-Turkish border and bolstering its forces in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. So, of course, it's been an ongoing issue. NATO allies have also joined the U.S. to fight in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. So, again, keep an eye on that as things develop. And, of course, I will have that coverage continued. So hit the subscribe button. Lavrov exits the G20, replaced by finance chief Russian agencies. This happened yesterday, I assume, over the Poland incident. And, of course, I'll talk about this in another video. Tens of billions of US dollars transferred to Ukraine, and then using FTX cryptocurrency, the funds were laundered back to not just Democrats, as it turns out. One of the big breaking stories. It looks like some of the top Republicans as well received roughly $2.5 million. So this is an absolute bombshell of a story that I'll get into. So I will see you guys in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe with the notification bell to stay tuned.